In the 4th year of our engagement, Harold got himself a mistress. To support her, he intercepted all my resources. The night I lost the Best Actress award, a reporter asked about my future plans. I smiled, took off my engagement ring, and said, "The first thing? Breaking off the engagement." The moment those words left my mouth, Harold, seated in the front row, lost his composure and panicked. Backstage, he blocked my way, his voice hoarse and desperate. "Coral, are you leaving me?" At the guest lounge during the 14th Film Festival, I was resting with my eyes closed. Ellen, my manager, burst in anxiously. "The evening gown you had your eye on was taken by Giselle." Leaning back in my chair, I didn't respond. Seeing my lack of reaction, Ellen grew frustrated. "Ever since Giselle debuted, she's stolen all your endorsements. Now she's even snatching haute couture gowns. Who's backing this witch to make her so brazen?" Her last question was directed at me. My fingers twitched slightly, and I opened my eyes slowly, my voice a bit hoarse. "Ellen, you know who." Seeing her look of disbelief, I uttered a name. "Harold." Harold, the CEO of the largest entertainment company, was also my fiancé. Ellen's first reaction was denial. "That's impossible. You've been together since high school, 10 years dating and 4 years engaged. Why would he?" Her voice trailed off, realization dawning. 14 years. A whole 14 years. It was too long. Long enough for my once proud beauty to fade. Long enough for love and excitement to be worn down by endless arguments. And then, Giselle appeared. Ellen fell silent. I stared out the window, lost in thought, remembering the day Harold confessed to me. He hadn't been home in ages, and when he finally came back, he sat stiffly on the sofa, completely out of place. The coffee table was covered with photos taken by a private investigator, pictures of him and Giselle passionately kissing on the streets of Paris. I asked him, no explanation? He loosened his tie with one hand, lit a cigarette, and glanced at me indifferently. "No need. It's exactly what you see." There were no denials, no excuses. He admitted it, just like that. I swallowed hard, fighting back the lump in my throat. Why? Why cheat? Why treat me like this? Harold exhaled a puff of smoke, his fingers brushing against the fine lines at the corner of my eye. His words slithered into my ears like venomous snakes, wrecking the remnants of my already shattered heart. "Coral, you're not young anymore." I froze, unsure how to respond. Yes, I was in my 30s, while his golden canary was barely in her 20s. Harold stubbed out his cigarette, as if suddenly recalling something, and pulled me into his arms. His fingers expertly undid the buttons of my blouse, trailing down my neck. Then he stopped, letting out a derisive laugh. "And now, touching you feels like touching myself." A surge of shame shot up my spine. Unable to control my emotions any longer, I slapped Harold across the face. "Bastard." He turned his head from the force, his face cold as he slammed the door on his way out. Disheveled, I lay on the sofa, staring numbly at the ceiling. My mind wandered to a time long ago when 16-year-old Harold stood beneath a kapok tree, blushing as he confessed to me. "Coral, I'll love you forever." And yet now, he said he didn't feel anything for me anymore. "Harold, your promises are as fleeting as the wind." Snapping out of my thoughts, I blinked away the sting in my eyes. After composing myself, I stepped out of the lounge. Before the film festival began, there was a red carpet segment. As I signed the board, I caught sight of Giselle making her grand entrance. She wore a moon-white gown, adorned with glittering sequins that shimmered like the Milky Way, captivating everyone's attention. Meanwhile, because my haute couture was stolen, I wore an unremarkable off-the-rack dress. The contrast was glaring. I had lost, miserably. But the worst part wasn't the dress. The most painful part was that her companion was my fiancé. Harold looked up and met my gaze. After a few seconds, he looked away, as if nothing had happened. Giselle tugged at his sleeve, whispering, "Your fiancé is here. Should we go say hi?" I overheard Harold's indifferent reply. "There's no need." Hand in hand with Giselle, he walked past me, his expression detached, like a stranger. The sadness I had suppressed surged back. My nose stung, and tears threatened to fall. Ellen blocked the nearby cameras, whispering urgently, "The press is watching. Keep your expression in check." But it was too late. Photos of my reddened eyes had already surfaced online. #CoralSgaze. #CoralHeartbreak. #Did Coral just break up? These hashtags quickly trended. Netizens speculated about the sadness and heartbreak in my gaze, convinced there was a story behind it. They were right. Shortly after, Giselle posted on social media to address the buzz. "Please don't overthink it, everyone. This is my first time walking the red carpet with my boyfriend, so we were a bit affectionate. Coral, I'm sorry if it upset you. Don't be too sad." The comments section erupted. My relationship with Harold wasn't public knowledge in the industry. Only Ellen knew. She was furious. As we entered the venue, she loudly cursed, "Boyfriend? How shameless." Giselle froze a few steps away. She wasn't the only one who heard it, Harold did too. He turned to look at me, his eyes cold, his voice low and full of suppressed anger. "Coral, your manager went too far. Apologize." My heart sank like lead. In our 14 years together, Harold had never raised his voice at me. The first time was last year. I had fallen from a wire stunt while filming, landing hard and being rushed to the hospital, only to find out I had lost our baby. Harold was livid, immediately summoning lawyers to hold the stunt team accountable. I pleaded with him to let it go. He held me tightly, stroking my hair. "Coral, that was our first child. I'm devastated." I knew he was. For the sake of achieving the perfect shot, I had refused a stunt double, leading to the accident. Harold couldn't bring himself to blame me, and instead directed his anger at others. When I was discharged, Harold went to settle the bill and accidentally discovered I had previously scheduled an abortion. He was nearly undone. He silently threw the paperwork at me, his voice icy and distant. "Coral." His gaze bore into me, full of disappointment. "If the accident hadn't happened, were you planning to hide this from me and terminate the pregnancy?" In the deafening silence, I nodded. I grew up in a single-parent household. My mother died during childbirth, and my father resented me for it. He was abusive, a drunk, and a gambler. He never loved me, and I had never known familial warmth. I didn't know how to love a child or how to be the kind of parent they deserved. So, I didn't want to risk using a child to figure it out. But Harold didn't understand. He grew up surrounded by love, in a happy and harmonious family. He couldn't comprehend my fears. Whenever I tried to explain, it would devolve into arguments. And by the end, we were both exhausted. In the periods of silence that followed, Harold moved into his office. He didn't come home or contact me. Not long after, he signed a new artist. Giselle. She looks a lot like a younger version of me. If there's any difference, it's probably that she's luckier, she has parents who love her. A friend once said, "Harold seems to be quite attentive to Giselle. You should keep an eye on that." So, I made a trip to the office. Through the glass door, I saw Giselle holding a coworker's baby, murmuring with a radiant smile, "Babies are so adorable. Who wouldn't love them?" Harold stood nearby, quietly watching her. Perhaps he didn't even realize how tenderly he was looking at her. In that moment, my heart trembled violently, as if I were on the verge of losing something incredibly important. I almost fled in panic. On the way home, my hands shook as I contacted a private investigator. When I finally received the photo of them kissing, I crouched down and stayed there for a long, long time. That's when it hit me, Harold had truly fallen for Giselle. He didn't love me anymore. He didn't want me anymore. The love I had cherished most in my youth had long since been swept away by the tides of time, now unrecognizable and utterly destroyed. This was the second time Harold had yelled at me, all because of another woman. Suppressing the emotions in my eyes, I smiled and asked, "Why should I apologize? Doesn't she know she's the third party here?" Faced with my blunt words, Giselle's lips quivered, her delicate frame trembling, as crystalline tears rolled down her cheeks. She choked out in a soft, pitiful voice, "Do you hate me so much, because I stole your fiancé? But I don't think I've done anything wrong. Love isn't about who came first, it's about who isn't loved. The one who isn't loved is the real third party. Shameless. Truly shameless." I opened my mouth, ready to teach her a lesson in decency. But at that moment, the lights dimmed, signaling the start of the awards ceremony. The host, holding a cue card, walked onto the stage. Before sitting down, Harold leaned over to Giselle and reassured her, "Don't worry. She's no match for you." A foreboding feeling welled up inside me. Sure enough, in the next second, the host announced, "The Best Actress award goes to Giselle." The moment the words landed, I closed my eyes in despair. Ellen, furious, leaned close to me and, out of the camera's view, gritted her teeth as she cursed Harold. "Are you insane? You bought Giselle that award. Do you even realize how much effort Coral put into winning that award? To promote your mistress, you intercepted her resources and stole her prize. She's your fiancée, for God's sake." Harold didn't respond. His thin lips curled into a cold smirk. "Do you regret it, Coral? Giving up his child? Losing his love and protection? Do you regret it?" I wanted to laugh, but when I moved the corners of my mouth, a tear fell instead. A sharp-eyed reporter caught the moment, approached with a camera, and thrust a microphone toward me. "Miss Coral, it's clear you're not feeling well. How do you plan to move forward after narrowly missing the Best Actress crown?" Ellen wanted to decline the interview, but I stopped her. I took a deep breath, faced the camera, and forced a pale smile. Some things need closure. In front of everyone, I removed my engagement ring and handed it back to Harold. "The first thing I'll do is break off the engagement." The words had barely left my lips when Harold lost his composure in the front row, his panic evident. He enunciated every word through clenched teeth. "What did you just say?" The room fell silent. No one cared about Giselle on stage anymore. All eyes, guests, reporters, even the host, were on me and Harold. Human nature thrives on gossip, especially when the drama comes straight from the source. I held the ring up and repeated patiently, "Harold, let's end this engagement." He didn't take the ring. His hand, hanging at his side, clenched so tightly that the veins bulged, his knuckles turning white. Flashes went off like a storm. The media scrambled to report on the scandal of Harold's affair with a rising actress, despite having a fiancé. Annoyed, Harold kicked over a chair and roared, "Stop filming. Anyone who leaks a single photo is done in this industry." Frightened by the powerful man's outburst, the reporters quickly turned off their cameras. I didn't care about his tantrum. I placed the ring on the table beside him and turned to leave. But Harold came after me. He stopped me backstage, his voice hoarse and desperate. "Coral, are you leaving me?" "Who left whom, Harold? The one who betrayed wasn't me." His question, dripping with irony, made me frown in frustration. I took a step back, putting distance between us. That small movement seemed to pierce him deeply. His lips trembled as if to speak, but he couldn't hide the panic in his eyes. I hadn't seen Harold this flustered in ages. From his suit pocket, he pulled out the ring I'd just removed. His voice wavered slightly as he commanded, "Put it back on." I didn't move. After a few seconds, Harold's patience ran out. He forcefully slid the engagement ring back onto my finger. Softly, he called my name, his tone reminiscent of our passionate early days. "Coral, just admit you were wrong, and I promise to cut ties with Giselle immediately. Come back to me. Let's have another child, and everything, endorsements, awards, the life you deserve, will still be yours." I stared at him, stunned for a long moment. Then I found it ridiculous. So everything he did was just to make me bow my head? Yes, the root of our problems was the child we lost. But there were so many ways he could have approached it, yet he chose the one that hurt the most. He chose to cheat. I swatted Harold's hand away, letting the ring fall to the ground with a crisp clang. "If you want a child, you can have Giselle give you one. I'm not young anymore, am I?" The words hit Harold like a boomerang. His face turned pale. "That wasn't what I meant." I cut him off with a bitter smile. "It doesn't matter anymore. Some words, once spoken, can't be taken back. The wounds they cause remain, even if the nails are pulled out." For a moment, the air felt frozen. Harold's eyes flickered with visible pain. His jaw tightened, his entire body stiff and tense, but his voice softened slightly as he asked, 14 years of love, Coral. Can you really just give it all up?" My eyelashes trembled. Harold was the person who defined my youth. Letting go was harder than I wanted to admit. I dug my nails into my palms, forcing myself to calm down. Then, in a steady voice, I uttered 2 words. Yes, I can. Hearing my answer, Harold's face turned deathly pale. I met his disbelieving gaze and spoke softly but firmly. So, let's end it here. From the moment he kissed Giselle. From the moment he said touching me felt like touching himself. I knew Harold had changed. He was no longer the boy who once loved me with his entire heart. In the countless moments he made me cry and broke my heart, I had rehearsed these words over and over in my mind. Now that I'd finally said them, I didn't feel as devastated as I thought I would. Instead, I felt relieved. I thought back to 4 years ago, on our anniversary. Harold and I had been curled up on the couch watching TV. The scene on screen showed the female lead and her best friend discussing love. She said relationships weren't about how long you've been together. It sounds impressive when you say years and years, but in reality, love is as fragile as paper. One poke, and it shatters. I felt uneasy and threw myself into Harold's arms, foolishly asking, "What about us? We had been together for 10 years. Would it all end up being for nothing?" Harold held me tightly, comforting me. "Silly girl, we're different. I'm going to marry you and make you my wife." The next day, he proposed. "Coral, there's no one else for me. My heart belongs to you, and it always will." At that moment, I believed him. I loved him with all my heart, like a moth to a flame. That's why, when it was time to let go, the pain was so unbearable. But no matter how much it hurt, I had to let go. When I told Harold, his face darkened, his gaze turning cold and oppressive. The proud prince, who always stood above others, now pleaded humbly. And yet, I refused him over and over again. He had long since lost his patience. Seeing I showed no signs of relenting, Harold grabbed my wrist and pinned me against the wall, his voice a stern warning. "Coral, stop this. You humiliated me by calling off the engagement in public." I let it go, and even lowered myself to beg you. "What more do you want?" He was truly angry, the fury in his eyes practically spilling over. But I was unmoved. I met his gaze with cold indifference. "I want to break up." Harold suddenly laughed, but it was a chilling laugh, void of warmth. "It seems I've spoiled you over the years." The colorful lights illuminated his face, and I could see the mockery reflected in his amber eyes. "Do you really think I have no way to deal with you?" The hand gripping my wrist tightened further. I let out a pained hiss. Ignoring my reaction, Harold leaned close to my ear and whispered darkly. "Go ahead, leave me if you dare. I guarantee you'll come crawling back to me in less than 2 weeks, crying for forgiveness." He was so confident. I curled my lips into a faint smile. That day will never come. It never will. Harold seemed caught off guard by my resolve, his expression momentarily stunned. In that brief moment of distraction, I mustered all my strength to break free from his grasp and walked away without looking back. I could feel his searing gaze burning into my back, as if he wanted to bore a hole through me. But I didn't stop. I didn't even turn my head. "Harold, once upon a time, I truly loved you. Now, when I say I'm giving up, I mean it." On the way home, the car was quiet. The awards ceremony was over, and the reporters on site had been silenced. Harold had ensured that no one leaked a word about us. Online, however, it was a different story. Giselle's name dominated the trending charts. Fans praised her as the youngest ever Best Actress. Others marveled at her red carpet look, comparing her to a goddess, and envied her perfect love story with Harold. Undeniably, tonight, Giselle was the biggest winner. Flowers and applause surrounded her wherever she went. As for me, I had nothing. The gown, the award, and the man, all taken away from me. I curled my lips into a bitter smile, unable to suppress the pang of sadness. Ellen, noticing my mood, asked the driver to stop the car. She returned a short while later with a bouquet of freshly bought silk cotton flowers and handed them to me like a treasured gift. "Your favorite flowers." I froze, hesitating to take them. "But I didn't win anything today." Ellen dismissed my words lightly. "Who says you need an award to deserve flowers?" She placed the bouquet into my arms and gently ruffled my hair. Getting a Best Actress nomination after just 4 years in the industry is already amazing. Besides, flowers and applause aren't reserved for winners alone. Coral deserves them too. I looked up at her, my vision blurring as tears welled up and spilled over. When I found out Harold had moved on, I didn't cry. When he gave Giselle the award that should have been mine, I didn't cry. When I broke up with him, I still didn't cry. But now, hearing Ellen's kind words, I couldn't hold back any longer. For every moment of despair, there's a moment when a friend's love pulls you back. Ellen was my light, shining into the dark cracks of my broken heart. She was warmth, she was solace. I leaned against her shoulder, crying uncontrollably. Flustered, she grabbed tissues from the drawer and wiped my tears. Honestly, letting go of a toxic person is a win in itself, she said gently. And as for those hollow awards? They're meaningless anyway. Anyone with a discerning eye knows whose acting is better. So stop crying. Your eyes are getting puffy. Listening to Ellen's calm, soothing voice, I felt the negativity within me slowly dissipate. It's okay. It's okay to lose an award. It's okay to lose love. I still have a long life ahead of me, with plenty of chances to start over. Half an hour later, I returned to my apartment. After my falling out with Harold, I moved out of his villa without taking any of my belongings. Ellen thoughtfully walked me to my door, reminded me to get some rest, and then left. But peace eluded me. At around 10 that night, as I was removing my makeup, my phone lit up on the vanity table. Giselle had updated her social media. Today is the most important day of my life. Sharing some good news, he proposed to me. The post included a sweet selfie. The background was Harold's villa. She was wearing a nightgown I'd left behind. On her hand was the engagement ring I had thrown away. She was smiling so brightly, her joy almost palpable. The comment section was filled with blessings. That night, I became Giselle's foil and was mercilessly mocked online. The more sincerely people congratulated her and Harold, the deeper their malice cut into me. I had done nothing wrong, yet I bore the brunt of endless ridicule and humiliation. Ellen urgently contacted PR to remove the trending hate against me. The response was polite but clear, it was a waste of effort. Because Harold was behind it. Under his orders, my remaining endorsements were terminated, one after another, while Giselle received those same opportunities. Even a movie I was halfway through filming replaced me overnight. Termination notices poured in, toppling my already fragile career like a crumbling building. I could barely breathe, my back pressed against the wall as if an invisible hand was choking me. My mind buzzed, on the brink of collapse. Then, my phone rang. Harold's light chuckle came through the receiver, laced with triumph. This is the price of leaving me. Do you still dare talk about breaking off the engagement? I never imagined Harold would resort to such despicable tactics to force me to reconcile. He wanted to crush my spirit, to make me crawl back to him, docile and begging. But I refused to give him the satisfaction. Calmly, I replied, I dare. There was a pause, followed by the sound of something heavy hitting the ground. Then, his voice returned, low and simmering with anger. Think carefully before you answer. Even if you don't care about your career, what about the title of Mrs. Harold? Does that mean nothing to you? I proposed to Giselle. She's living in your house, wearing your engagement ring. Aren't you jealous at all? I didn't understand. At this point, what was the point of these questions? In my eyes, the greatest respect for a relationship is to cherish each other while together and to part peacefully when it ends. It should never come to this. I gripped my phone tightly, exhaled deeply, and tried to maintain the last shred of dignity. Harold, I've made myself very clear. We're over. Out of respect for what we once had, let's part ways gracefully. Harold's anger erupted for reasons I couldn't quite grasp. His emotions spiraled out of control, and no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't hide the aggression in his tone. You say we were in love. Then tell me this, why was your first instinct to give up when you found out you were carrying my child? Be honest with yourself, did you ever truly love me? Harold seemed to have forgotten. He had asked me this very question a long time ago. Back then, I patiently reassured him over and over, of course I love you. And I did, Harold. I loved you. But you're not me. You'll never understand the pain of having your ribs kicked in by an alcoholic father. You'll never wonder why I tremble at the sight of anything resembling a stick. You'll never grasp why, on the day loan sharks drove my dad to his death, I felt relief instead of despair. Your entire understanding of me came solely from the fragments I shared. Thin, shallow words that could never make you feel the weight of my experiences. So, you dismissed me as melodramatic, exaggerating my pain. You stood on the opposite side, questioning why I'd so easily given up on the child, why I didn't try harder. But there's something I've always wanted to ask you, too. How can someone who hasn't even healed themselves be ready to take on the responsibility of parenthood? And besides, that child wasn't planned. It wouldn't have happened if you hadn't taken advantage of me while I was drunk, ignoring all precautions and forcing your way in. But I never said these words aloud. I naively believed that once your anger subsided, we could sit down and have a calm conversation. I waited. And waited. But all I got was a photograph of you passionately kissing Giselle. How laughable. Coral, say something. Harold's voice yanked me back to reality. Rubbing my temples in exhaustion, I decided there was no point in arguing further. So I gave in and said it outright. Fine, I don't love you. Can you leave me alone now? Before he could respond, I hung up. But Harold wasn't about to let me go so easily. In just 15 days, he destroyed everything I'd worked for over 4 years. Ellen pulled every string she could to secure me opportunities. But the answers were always the same. Sorry, Miss Coral. Your acting is excellent, but Harold has instructed us not to hire you. I refused to give up. I auditioned wherever I could, sent messages to every director and producer I'd ever worked with, pleading for a chance. I knew the odds were slim, but I had to try. That's just the kind of person I am. In high school, when Harold confessed his love and I agreed to date him, I didn't slack off. I studied harder than ever, aiming for the top of the class. In college, when Harold took me to high society galas, I was mocked for not knowing how to appreciate wine. I didn't storm out. Instead, I enrolled in courses, learning everything from wine tasting to flower arranging until I could handle it all with ease. After graduation, when Harold proposed, his mother, a former film icon, greeted me with a frown and bluntly declared that someone with my humble background would never marry into their family. I wasn't angry. I simply smiled and asked, what if I became someone like you? What if I could rise from nothing, achieve fame and fortune, and stand proudly by his side? Harold's mother froze, and for the first time, she looked at me with something other than disdain. There was a hint of admiration. I kept my promise. In 4 years, I went from playing background roles to leading ones, honing my craft without complaint. Despite Harold's influence, I never used his name to gain favors or shortcuts. Ellen often said I worked like someone with no regard for their life. Even Harold had urged me to slow down, saying he'd give up his family's fortune and live a simple life with me. But I refused. To love someone means standing at their side, as their equal, not dragging them down into the mud to accommodate you. I would never be a parasitic vine, clinging to him. I had to be a sturdy tree, standing tall and independent beside him. Even now, as we part ways and our paths diverge, I remain steadfast, a tree that grows upward, strong and self-sufficient. Perhaps my prayers were heard. Out of the hundreds of messages I sent, one finally received a reply. An old producer I'd worked with, moved by past collaborations, secretly tipped me off. Director Ives was returning to the country and was preparing to shoot a film about domestic violence. The lead role hadn't been cast yet. Ives was highly regarded in the industry. His films often attracted international investors, making it difficult for Harold to interfere. Without hesitation, I submitted my application to the production team. That evening, my empty inbox pinged with a single email. It was from Ives. The message was brief. I've heard great things about you. You're more than welcome to audition. On the 20th day after my breakup with Harold, I attended the audition for Rebirth. Ives was said to have poured his heart and soul into this project, painstakingly refining the script and holding rigorous auditions to ensure fairness. The process would be judged by a panel of evaluators. In the waiting area, I ran into Giselle. It was hardly surprising. This was a coveted opportunity, and everyone wanted a piece of it. She flipped her hair and made a point of flaunting the diamond ring on her finger. "What a coincidence, you're here for the lead role too," she sneered. "But let me save you some time. Maybe you didn't know, but the panelists all know my boyfriend." The implication was clear, the role was already hers. I paused my script review, stood up, and looked down at her with a raised brow. "What's the matter? Does climbing the ladder through men give you a sense of superiority? If you dared to compete with me based on talent, I might respect you. But you don't. You bought awards last time, and now you're trying to use connections to land this role. Doesn't that make you a thief?" Giselle's face turned beet red, her lips trembling as she searched for a retort. But I wasn't about to give her the chance. I pulled out my phone, opened her social media page, and zoomed in on one of her photos. With a smile, I remarked, "Wearing my pajamas, my ring, and announcing your engagement to my ex-fiancé. Looks like you're not just a thief, you also have a knack for picking up garbage I've thrown away." My words were sharp and unyielding, leaving no room for mercy. Giselle was so furious she began shaking. With no one else around, she dropped the pretense of being sweet and delicate, glaring at me with venomous eyes. "Don't be so self-righteous. In this industry, you have to fight and claw your way to the top. Buying awards and roles is normal. You couldn't win Best Actress or keep his heart. How is that my fault?" I let out a cold laugh. Her audacity was truly remarkable, twisting everything to place the blame on me with just a few sentences. I was about to retort when the sound of approaching footsteps interrupted us. Giselle's manager entered, looking impatient. "Are you ready? The audition is about to start." Giselle's expression stiffened. She'd been so focused on arguing with me that she hadn't even memorized her lines. It looked like she'd have to rely on improvisation. The manager reassured her, "Don't worry. Even if you mess up, those judges will still cast their votes for you, considering Harold's influence." Hearing this, Giselle curled her lips smugly. As she brushed past me, she made sure to shove me hard with her shoulder. "Move. Don't block my way." I stumbled and barely managed to steady myself against the wall. When they were finally out of sight, the room was quiet, leaving only me behind. A spring breeze blew in through the cracks of the window, rustling the script on the table and revealing the recorder pressed underneath the final page. I lowered my gaze and pressed the stop button. Recording complete. Giselle wasn't wrong about one thing: in the entertainment industry, survival often means fighting and scrambling for opportunities. I might disdain dirty tricks, but that doesn't mean I don't know how to protect myself. I packaged the recording and sent it to Ellen. Then I sat down and resumed my focus on the script. Before long, a figure stopped in front of me. I slowly raised my head, only to meet a pair of deep, penetrating eyes. The man was dressed in a khaki trench coat and wore gold-rimmed glasses. A subtle, comforting scent wafted from him, a blend of freshly fallen rain, earthy dew, and the clean fragrance of green plants. It was Ives. I hadn't expected him to come to the waiting area. I stammered as I greeted him. He nodded slightly and smiled, warm and effortless, like a gentle spring breeze. "Miss Coral, it's a pleasure to finally meet you." "Finally?" Ives' smile deepened as he explained, "I watched your movies while I was studying abroad. Your acting is excellent. To be honest, you're the actress I want to work with the most right now." Hearing praise from a director I admired, I felt my ears heating up. While I was thrilled, an undercurrent of worry lingered. Ives had just returned to the country and might not know about my current situation. After that incident, my public image had taken a nosedive. Whenever the audience mentioned me, their comments were laced with veiled and outright criticism, saying I couldn't compare to Giselle. In this context, working with me didn't seem like the wisest choice. But it felt as if Ives could see right through me. He took a step closer, shortening the distance between us. His long fingers tapped rhythmically on the table, creating a steady sound. "Everyone in the industry says you've offended Harold and that you've been blacklisted by investors. They've advised me not to even give you an audition. But I've never bowed to capital. I only look at talent. If you can secure this role..." He locked eyes with me, his words deliberate and unwavering. "I will help you reclaim your place in the film industry." I believed in Ives. He had the ability to propel me to the pinnacle of success. Every actress who had ever starred as the lead in his films had gone on to win Best Actress awards. Without exception. Before leaving, Ives raised his hand lightly, touching his temple with his index and middle fingers together in a playful salute. He smiled encouragingly. "Break a leg." I smiled back, the first genuine smile I'd shown in these dark days. After repeatedly going over the script countless times, a staff member finally called my name and led me into the audition room. The big screen displayed the results of the previous round of evaluations. Giselle had the highest votes in the room. The judges applauded her enthusiastically, except for Ives, who sat with his hands in his pockets, his brows furrowed in visible discontent. Giselle seemed oblivious, maintaining her air of superiority as she smugly glanced my way. I smiled faintly and gestured for her to check her phone. While she was auditioning, Ellen had retaliated by reaching out to several media outlets, exposing the recording, and mobilizing numerous marketing accounts to control the narrative. The moment Giselle opened Weibo, she would see that her name was trending, but for all the wrong reasons. Hashtag Giselle fake queen. Hashtag Giselle slept her way to the top. Hashtag Giselle buys awards and roles. Public opinion shifted instantly. In less than 10 minutes, Giselle's social media accounts were flooded with over 1 million angry comments. She lost followers in droves as netizens, furious at being deceived, dug up dirt on her, demanding she be banished from the entertainment industry. Giselle, unaccustomed to such backlash, pointed at me and screamed hysterically. "It was you. You did this, didn't you?" I said nothing. In a corner where no one else could see, I mouthed 2 words to her. "Isn't it obvious, idiot?" She snapped, lunging at me and yanking my hair in a fit of rage. A long, elegant hand pressed firmly on her shoulder. I've stepped between us, shielding me protectively. His expression was cold as he spoke. "What do you think you're doing?" He then summoned security and had Giselle escorted out. Escort was putting it mildly. She was practically dragged out, kicking and screaming, by her arms. I watched as the once arrogant queen was unceremoniously thrown out the door. The judges exchanged glances, shaking their heads in resignation. With this scandal and the undeniable evidence of the recording, Giselle's reputation was beyond salvaging. No matter how powerful her connections were, a comeback seemed impossible. After the commotion died down, the room returned to silence. Ives and the judges watched me intently as I began my performance. The movie Rebirth tells the story of a woman from an underprivileged background who endures domestic violence from her father and betrayal by her lover. Through immense struggles, she transforms herself and eventually shines in her chosen field. The plot mirrored my early experiences, making the role resonate deeply with me. No one understood better than I did how to portray the excruciating pain of being beaten or the fear in a victim's eyes when facing their abuser. I closed my eyes, immersing myself in the emotions. Memories of those nightmare-filled days crept up like vines, suffocating me. As I delivered my lines, I felt completely one with the character. She was borrowing my body to relive her life. And I was borrowing her soul to unleash my pain. My performance was so immersive that when I opened my eyes, I found Ives staring at me with awe and admiration. Even the judges who were close to Harold put aside their biases and cast their votes for me, following their hearts. The contract was signed on the spot. As I finished signing my name, I pinched my palm hard, making sure I wasn't dreaming. Tears nearly welled up. Ellen's voice trembled with emotion as she sobbed, "Finally, after all this time, the hard days are over." She had been by my side through those darkest times, never giving up on me. I sniffled and sincerely thanked her. But the person I owed the most gratitude to was Ives. I quickly walked over to him and bowed deeply. "Thank you for giving me this opportunity." He helped me up with gentlemanly grace. "I told you, you're the actress I most want to work with." Ives' voice was clean and clear, with a slight huskiness that felt like a spring drizzle, subtly intoxicating. By the time I left the set, night had fallen. Ellen's driver hadn't arrived yet, so I waited by the roadside, clutching the contract while scrolling through my phone. My inbox was flooded with messages, some offering comfort and congratulating me, others apologizing for their past harsh words. This was good. A shift in public opinion would be a significant boost to my career. I smiled and locked my phone, only to see headlights approaching. I thought Ellen's driver had arrived, but the car window rolled down, revealing Harold's face. He looked haggard, as if he hadn't slept in days. A half-smoked cigarette rested between his fingers, thin blue smoke curling upward. Under the hazy moonlight, he beckoned to me. "Come here." I didn't expect Harold to be here. Giselle's reputation is in tatters right now, and her company is getting slammed online, with stock prices plummeting. At a time like this, he should be busy convening a board meeting to discuss how to handle the public outcry. How does he have time to find me? I pretended not to hear and turned to walk in the opposite direction. Harold got out of the car before me, forcefully wrapped his arm around my waist, pulling me into his embrace, with his chin resting on my shoulder. "It's been so long since we last saw each other, and you're still mad at me? Do you know," he continued, "that for 20 days, 474 hours, every minute and every second, I've been thinking about you? I admit it, I shouldn't have ruined your career, but today, you got your revenge. We're even now, all right?" He held me tightly, as though I was a treasure he had lost and just found again. "Let's make up, Coral. I can't live without you." His voice was hoarse and deep, his warm lips lingering at my ear, kissing my neck softly, gently. To anyone else watching, this scene must have seemed intimate and filled with longing. But all I felt was disgust. I pushed him away with force, my expression calm and my tone distant. "Harold, have some dignity. We've already broken up, and Giselle is your current fiancée." Harold's eyes darkened, his tongue pressed against his cheek, and he gave a self-deprecating smile. "She's just a stand-in, nothing more than that. How can she be called your fiancée? I made her a star, indulged her in taking your resources, defended her in front of you, even proposed to her just to annoy you. I wanted to make you jealous, make you feel threatened, so you'd change your mind and agree to have a child with me. That's all. Honestly, the person I've always loved is you, and only you." He stared at me expectantly, hoping to see some kind of reaction, any hint of emotion in my eyes. But unfortunately, there was nothing. I looked at him coldly, asking just one question. "Did you sleep with her?" He was speechless. His gaze shifted uncomfortably, not daring to meet my eyes, not answering. The answer was crystal clear. I scoffed. "So this is what you call love? It's disgusting." The word disgusting hit Harold like a hammer. His eyes reddened immediately, a deep sadness seemed to spread across his face, his Adam's apple bobbed, but he couldn't say a word. He looked like a heartbroken puppy. If this had happened before, I would have felt unbearable sympathy, but now, I didn't even look at him as I turned and walked away. His little act didn't work. He hurried to catch up, blocking my path and cornering me against the wall, stubbornly locking eyes with me as he demanded, "I disgust you? Then what about you, Coral? If it weren't for your so-called bullshit psychological trauma, how could we have ended up like this?" Bullshit psychological trauma. That's how he had once dismissed my childhood wounds. I looked up at the night sky, the clouds were gathering, signaling a storm. If we continued to argue, it would get us nowhere. So I decided to seize this chance and say everything that had been left unsaid. I led him into an empty alley and took off the only shirt I was wearing, revealing a string of letters tattooed on the back of my neck. "Only love, Harold." You asked me why I tattooed it here, whether it was for more passion during intimacy. I blushed and didn't say anything, but now I can tell you why. Because, except for my spine, every other part of my body has suffered fractures, some big, some small. On rainy days, the pain never stops. And all this pain, I owe to my dear father. Harold's face went pale with shock. He had been born with a silver spoon in his mouth, living a life of luxury, with family members who spoiled him. To him, parents loving their children was an instinct. The domestic violence I mentioned was just some minor quarrels. How could it have been severe enough to cause psychological trauma? I recounted everything, one by one. When I was 8, he got drunk and hit me with a bottle, cutting my forehead. When I was 10, he got addicted to gambling, owed a large sum of money, and in a bad mood, he broke my finger. When I was 12, on my mother's death anniversary, he said I killed her and beat me with a stick, breaking my leg. When I was 14, some loan sharks came to collect, and he pushed me to a group of thugs, letting them do whatever they wanted to me as payment. I barely escaped and called the police. He was locked up for a few days, but when he got out, he beat me even more savagely, breaking my ribs, before jumping off a building. I kept listing the details. By the end, my tears were streaming down my face. This was what it felt like to expose old wounds, to be roasted alive over an open flame, my heart being seared by boiling oil. It hurt. It really hurt. Harold's pupils trembled violently. After 14 years of love, I had never told him all these details before. He could barely stand, his face pale, and his dry eyes shimmered with unshed tears. It wasn't until this moment that he realized just how much damage his family had done to me. But sadly, it was too late. That night, Harold watched Coral walk away, her back disappearing into the night. His heart ached so much that it felt like he couldn't breathe. How stupid and oblivious was he, not realizing his most beloved woman had gone through so much suffering? The spring night was cold, and a thunderclap rumbled in the distance. Lightning flickered, bright as day, and rain began to pour. Harold didn't leave. He slumped against the crumbling wall, slowly sinking to the ground, burying his head in his arms, staying in that position without moving. As the rain blurred his vision, his thoughts were slowly overtaken by memories, each one creeping into his mind. He thought about the day Coral lost the baby, their first argument, how he had lashed out at her with the cruelest words, calling her heartless. Coral had almost cried. But she still tried her best to hold back the tears, explaining herself gently, her patience never running out. But when she mentioned words like domestic violence, psychological trauma, and not wanting to have children for now, he had only found them absurd. It was just a few beatings as a child. Who hasn't gone through that? It was all just melodramatic nonsense. He impatiently waved his hand to interrupt her. In his frustration, he shoved her a little too hard. When she fell to the ground, her eyes were filled with disbelief. Her forehead hit the corner of a table, and blood began to seep out. Harold panicked. "I didn't mean to." But halfway through his sentence, he fell silent. He saw Coral instinctively duck under the table, her shoulders hunched, lifting her arm to block him from touching her. It was strange. Things like this had happened more than once. The time he took her to play golf, for example, just a normal club, but when she saw it, she started shaking for no reason. Yet Harold had never asked her why. To be more precise, he didn't care. He loved how she always fought to rise above, how she never gave up even in the face of adversity. Whether it was studying or working in showbiz, she gave everything her best. As for her past, he had no interest in exploring it. Even if she told him, he wouldn't be able to empathize. Growing up at the top of the pyramid, having everything, it was impossible to understand the hardships of others. He and Coral had become like two people, one who never asked and wouldn't believe the answer if given, and the other who held back, until eventually, they both stopped trying to talk. Maybe, from this moment on, their relationship started to fall apart. After that, Giselle stormed into his life. A girl in her early 20s, her face full of collagen, laughing, scolding, with a playful charm that made her as lively as Coral, who was 10 years older. What stood out the most, though, was how much she loved children. So, Harold briefly found himself drawn to her. It's no surprise really, when a young, beautiful girl who bears an uncanny resemblance to your first love is always in front of you, how could you remain completely indifferent? But compared to the 14 years of history he shared with Coral, this fleeting attraction was nothing. In his heart, Coral was the one and only true love of his life. All other distractions could be cast aside. So when the girl pretended to sprain her ankle for the 4th time and fell into his arms, he could no longer bear it. "Stop this," he said, "I have a fiancé." Giselle, her voice soft, replied, "I don't care. I just want to stay by your side. I'll do what Coral won't. Like, having children for you." When she said that, with a face that was 7/10 like Coral's, it was incredibly tempting. In that moment, he forgot to reject her. Giselle seized the opportunity, tiptoeing to lightly kiss him on the lips. Not far away, someone snapped a photo. When the picture was sent back to their home country and the affair was questioned, Harold initially wanted to explain and beg for forgiveness. But then he remembered that abortion appointment slip and their stillborn child. Anger surged inside him, and he lashed out with hurtful words. He said, "You're not young anymore. And also, now when I touch you, it feels like I'm touching myself." As her closest lover, he knew exactly where to hurt her the most. Coral stared at him in shock, her eyes slowly dimming. He pretended not to notice and stormed out, but inside, he was already regretting it. He spent the whole night smoking downstairs, thinking he would apologize once his emotions calmed down. But when the sun came up, he saw her, perfectly made up, acting as though nothing had happened, heading out to film and attend events. That rekindled the anger inside him. Why was he down here, reflecting deeply on his actions, while she remained so unbothered, going about her work? Did she really love him? In the months that followed, he almost took a vengeful pleasure in blocking her career opportunities, while allowing Giselle to publicly hype their supposed romance. Yes, he was doing it on purpose. He wanted to provoke her, force her to give in. But Coral would not back down. The conflict intensified, and friends began to intervene, urging him, "Enough is enough, don't push it too far. If you really hurt her and she leaves you, what will you do?" Harold smiled. In his mind, it would never happen. Coral had been with him since she was 16, and now at 30, her best years had all been invested in him. With such a high sunk cost, how could she let go? He was so sure of this. That when Coral publicly announced their breakup at the awards ceremony, he froze for several seconds, before fully realizing what was happening. He watched as she took off the ring, once her most prized possession, and carelessly tossed it on the table. "Harold, let's break off the engagement." When the words left her lips, it felt like something shattered inside him, a pain so sharp it took his breath away. He instinctively ran after her, pleading with her not to leave. It was useless. He tried everything, using his career to pressure her into reconsidering. It didn't work. During the days they were apart, Harold couldn't sleep peacefully, not even when Giselle, his temporary substitute, lay next to him. He still woke up in the middle of the night, his heart racing. Until today, when he finally couldn't take it anymore. He missed Coral, and he wanted to see her. As soon as he arrived on set, Giselle's desperate phone call came through. "Did you see the trending topics online? Coral's really ruthless, trying to step on me to rise higher. I'm at my wit's end. Please, for old time's sake, help me just one last time, please?" Why did she say one last time? Because just a few days ago, he had severed ties with Giselle. Helping her buy off the judges to land the lead role in The New Life was his parting gift. But no one had expected Coral to rise to fame on her own merits. Giselle was crying, begging him to help, her voice broken. It was hard to ignore the girl he had once been intimate with, and his heart softened. He was just about to agree, when he suddenly saw her at the end of the road. The woman he had longed for day and night, her lips curved in a smile, humming as she walked toward him. Harold hadn't seen Coral so happy in a long time. He stared at her for a while, then casually turned to Giselle and said, "If my fiancé wants to hurt you, then you just have to take it." With that, he threw the phone aside and rushed to Coral's side. He wanted to tell her that he couldn't lose her, that he didn't want to lose her. As long as she would come back, he didn't care about children anymore. But Coral no longer gave him a chance. The rain poured harder. I went back, took a hot shower, and after drying my hair, I sat at my desk, diligently writing character profiles and notes. But my phone kept buzzing in my pocket. I glanced at the caller ID. It was the friend who had warned me about Giselle earlier, also a friend of Harold's. His voice was urgent. "Sorry to bother you so late, but Harold's downstairs, wanting to apologize. No matter how much I try to convince him, he won't leave. The rain's too heavy, and if he stays out there, he'll get sick." I paused for 2 seconds. Put him on the phone. When the thin curtain was drawn back, Harold, drenched from the rain, seemed to sense it and looked up. I was inside, warm and dry, staring back at him. He looked up, his posture slightly hunched, his expression so calm, yet filled with an underlying sense of helplessness, a stark contrast to his usual arrogant self. Taking the phone, he hesitantly called out, "Coral." Then he added, "I'm sorry." That sentence pulled me back in time. I couldn't remember exactly when, but there was a year I filmed in a remote mountain area where transport was poor and the crew's budget was tight. The food was almost always vegetarian. Harold had video called me, and when he saw the box lunch I was eating, he was visibly displeased. "Do you really have to shoot this terrible movie? Come back, I'll take care of you." I told him, no. I had promised his mother I would make something of myself. Harold's face had gone blank, and he didn't speak. I thought he was angry, but the next day, a private plane with an H on the side landed at the mountain's helipad. Thousands of boxes of fresh, expensive ingredients were delivered to the set. The director couldn't stop smiling. But being the sharp operator he was, he knew there was no such thing as a free lunch. He quickly pushed me and the other actresses into Harold's room, saying it was to keep him company. The truth was, he was selecting the girl he'd sleep with that night. One of the girls, bold as ever, immediately began undressing, even stripping off her underwear. Harold, who had been standing by the window, turned around, his face turning ashen. He slammed his wine glass on the floor, shouting at them to get out. He only left me in the room. Outside the window, the rain was gently falling, and he knelt on the floor, holding my hand, repeatedly apologizing, as though he were about to dig out his own eyes. "I'm sorry. I didn't see anything. Please don't be upset." I wasn't upset, not really. But when I saw him so humble, kneeling like that, my heart ached. I never thought he would lower himself so much for me. Time flowed back to tonight. It was the same rainy night, and the same kneeling apology. But my heart was as calm as still water. I paused for a moment and then laughed. "Your apology, I don't accept. It's late, I need to rest. Can you get out of my sight?" Harold remained kneeling quietly, his pale lips pressed into a thin line. When he heard me tell him to leave, his soaked body trembled slightly, almost pleading as he said, "Coral, please don't be so cruel to me. I know I was wrong. I shouldn't have underestimated your suffering. I shouldn't have taken advantage of your love and hurt you so recklessly. And I definitely shouldn't have tangled with my stand-in like that. But I swear, I'll never do anything to hurt you again. Please, can you forgive me just this once?" By the end, his voice was barely audible, his tears falling, each drop hitting the ground and mingling with the rainwater. "No." I rejected him firmly, then ended the conversation. "That's it. I'm hanging up." I didn't look back at him. I turned on Do Not Disturb mode, drew the curtains, and settled into a peaceful sleep. The next morning, when I woke up, I found an unread message on my phone. "Ellen, Coral, you're trending again." Only then did I realize that a neighbor had recorded the video of Harold pleading for reconciliation in the rain the previous night, uploaded it online, and it had sparked heated discussion. To satisfy everyone's curiosity and also to calm my fans, I logged into my account and responded personally, "Thank you all for your concern. I never go back on my decisions." The comments section was filled with praise. Most celebrities tend to stay silent or handle rumors coldly, but I went against the grain, which actually earned me a lot of support. As the hype grew, the official account of the movie New Life posted my official photo along with a caption. "You deserve better," at actress Coral. The account operator even added a note, "The boss asked me to show full support for the leading lady." We all knew who the boss was. Ellen's eyes sparkled with excitement, and she made a face like she'd just gotten a secret. "Ah. It's Ives." I just smiled and said nothing. The rain had stopped outside. A beam of golden sunshine streamed through the glass, landing on me. I felt absolutely certain. From this moment on, I would say goodbye to the past and start a new life. In April, when the K-pop flowers were in full bloom, I joined the film set. The filming was completely closed off, apart from the necessary staff, no one else was allowed in. But during this time, I still received an occasional letter of apology. I didn't need to guess who wrote them. I didn't read them, I just packed them all up and threw them in the trash. The makeup artist, who was bribed by Harold, gave me a sly smile. "At least open one and take a look. Harold caught pneumonia, but forced himself out of the hospital and traveled all the way here just to be near you. It's kinda pathetic." I tilted my head and looked at her, not showing any emotion. She continued on her own, "Actually, Harold already broke up with Giselle. If you could forgive him, he would definitely love you more than before. A broken mirror can be pieced together, what a beautiful ending." I'd always been kind to the team and never made things difficult for them, but this time I couldn't suppress my anger. Still, I managed to hold it back and politely told her, "Starting tomorrow, you're fired." After I got a new makeup artist, the scribbled apology letters disappeared. The atmosphere grew quieter, and I focused solely on the filming. 4 months later, New Life officially wrapped. Ives and I were invited to a talk show as part of the movie's promotional campaign. Media outlets competed to ask questions, most of which were about the movie's plot. But in the second half of the show, suddenly, a young girl raised her microphone and sharply asked me, "Miss Coral, since your debut, you've won no awards, yet a drama-filled love triangle has made headlines. People online are calling Giselle the third party, but from what I know, your relationship with Harold was already in trouble before she appeared, right? You didn't want children, which led to Harold losing interest and seeking out true love elsewhere. You were at fault, but you've been guiding public opinion to attack Giselle. Don't you think you owe her an apology?" I furrowed my brow and looked at her. The girl was wearing an intern reporter uniform with a badge from Southern Media University pinned to her chest. If I remembered correctly, Giselle had graduated from the same school. So, this was clearly a favor for her senior. I cleared my throat and replied seriously, "I don't really understand your logic. If a couple that is about to marry falls apart, does that mean it's okay for someone else to step in and claim true love without any criticism?" She shot back, "At least from a moral standpoint, it shouldn't be attacked so harshly. By the way, Miss Coral, why don't you want to take on the societal responsibility of having children? Is it because you've given up on having children too many times, and now your body can't handle it? Or is there some kind of psychological issue?" Her question was so pointed and malicious that even the other journalists cast sidelong glances at her. Normally, this would be a program accident, and they'd cut the segment. Ellen, along with the director, tried to get them to replace the aggressive reporter. But because the topic involved a celebrity's love scandal and the increasingly hot debate around women's reproductive rights, the organizers stubbornly kept pushing me to answer. My hands, hidden in my sleeves, trembled slightly. I wasn't prepared to tear open old wounds in front of so many people. Just as I was at a loss, someone beside me suddenly stood up. Ives took the microphone and came to my rescue. "Excuse me, Miss Reporter, first of all, women's reproductive rights are not an obligation, but a choice. They have the right to decide whether or not to have children without anyone else's interference. Secondly, your question is rude and malicious. We reserve the right to pursue legal action for slander." The reporter turned pale, her face alternating between blue and white. She probably hadn't expected that, in her attempt to defend Giselle, she might end up facing legal consequences. Once personal interests are involved, it's hard to stand up for others, so she quickly scurried away. After the interview ended, Ives and I walked out of the recording room side by side. I was still processing the earlier exchange when I accidentally missed a step going down the stairs. A pair of hands swiftly caught me around the waist, steadying me. "Be careful." The proximity was too close. When his eyes met mine, all I could think of was what he had said: women have the freedom to choose whether or not to have children. They don't need anyone pointing fingers at them. I had spent countless sleepless nights, tossing and turning, wondering if I'd made the wrong decision. But today, Ives told me that women have the right to make their own choices. No one should judge them. All the accumulated grievances burst forth, and my tears fell like pearls off a broken string. Ives looked at me with concern. "Why are you crying? Did you hurt your foot?" He squatted down, about to check my ankle carefully. But suddenly, a familiar figure rushed out from around the corner. Harold picked me up in a protective manner, his eyes filled with hostility as he looked at Ives. "Don't touch my girl." It had been 4 months since we last met, and he had lost a lot of weight. It seemed that the pneumonia had really taken a toll on him. Ives raised an eyebrow. "Your girl? Mr. Harold has Alzheimer's, or was he offline during his hospitalization? Now the whole world knows. You got dumped." Harold was hit right where it hurt. His mood turned instantly dark, and there was a coldness in his eyes. "Shut up. What the hell are you? How dare you talk back to me?" Since the day Harold was born, everyone around him had either revered or indulged him. To have his pride publicly challenged was unbearable, and naturally, he was furious. I, who had stayed silent from beginning to end, finally allowed my gaze to shift toward Harold. As soon as he noticed my eyes on him, his expression softened, and in the gentlest tone, he asked if I had been scared. I pulled away from his embrace and looked at him with a blank expression, speaking in a calm, almost detached voice. "You went too far, Harold. Apologize." He froze in place. Time seemed to stop for a moment. Suddenly, I remembered how, a long time ago, he had used the same cold tone to order me to apologize to Giselle. How did I feel back then? Did you feel it, Harold? The next time I saw Giselle was on the day New Beginnings premiered. The box office hit over 100 million on its opening day, and the production team arranged a celebratory banquet. I had a few drinks, and my face flushed slightly. While stepping out for some fresh air, I happened to glance at the door of the neighboring private room, which had been left ajar. Giselle was standing in the middle of a group of men, dressed provocatively, smiling flatteringly as she poured them drinks one by one. Did you all enjoy yourselves? As for the comeback, please, I'll leave it to you gentlemen. One man, old enough to be her father, slid the strap of her dress down and stuffed a room key inside. It was obvious, unspoken rules at play. Giselle accepted it with apparent ease, as though it were nothing new. As she walked out of the room, chatting and laughing with the men, she locked eyes with me. I could clearly see the flicker of hatred in her eyes. It was fleeting. So quick that I almost thought I imagined it. After they left, I leaned against the railing, feeling the wind, and the effects of the alcohol slowly crept up on me, making my head spin. Suddenly, a waiter stopped beside me. Miss, honey water. Honey water was known for its great ability to help sober up. But I hadn't ordered it. The waiter pointed behind me. It was ordered by that gentleman. I followed his finger and saw Harold standing under a silk tree in the courtyard, smiling at me in a way that almost seemed like he was trying to please me. That smile was so pure. For a moment, I felt a little disoriented. It was as if I saw a 16-year-old Harold smiling at me, back when his eyes held nothing but me. But I knew this was the 30-year-old Harold. Not the person I once loved. I thanked the waiter, but didn't drink the honey water. Instead, I asked Ellen for a hangover candy. Harold stood there, stunned, his expression one of loneliness and hurt. Ellen wrapped her arm around my shoulders, asking in frustration, "He's been following you around every day, never too close, never too far. He's been doing this for almost 6 months now. Why hasn't he given up?" I did the math in my head. Ever since that day, when I've mocked Harold for being dumped, it seemed like something snapped in him. During a media interview, he publicly declared, "I will win Coral back. She is the only woman I will ever marry." It wasn't just talk. His actions followed suit. The young master, who had never cooked before, started preparing meals for me, never missing a single one, his fingers blistering from the heat. I went to events, and he followed, spending lavishly to set off fireworks for me across the city. I called him pathetic, but he didn't care. He happily continued to chase after me. I thought Harold would keep doing this forever. But then, the change came so quickly. It was during a roadshow. I was on stage answering questions from fans, and Harold was sitting in the front row, gazing at me with deep affection. Suddenly, a crazy woman rushed out from the crowd. Her face was horribly disfigured, and she was terrifying. "Bitch, it's all your fault. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't have ended up like this." I recognized her voice, Giselle. After latching onto a wealthy old man, she had indeed received a few small endorsements. But the old man's wife was a firecracker, and when she found out about Giselle, she sent someone to ruin her face. Without her looks, her benefactor no longer protected her, and she was cast aside. Now, Giselle seemed to blame all her misfortune on me. She pulled out a bottle of suspicious liquid from her bag and, in a fit of madness, splashed it at me. "Coral, go die." She was too fast, and I didn't have time to dodge. I instinctively shut my eyes. But the pain I was expecting never came. Instead, I found myself in a warm embrace. Harold had rushed to block me, taking the full brunt of the acid on his suit. A few drops splashed onto his face. He grunted in pain, beads of sweat forming on his forehead, yet he still smiled at me. "Coral, don't be scared. I'm here." I froze, staring at him, tears streaming down my face. In the last moment before I lost consciousness, Harold was still wiping my tears away. "What's the matter?" "I'm not dead yet. Don't cry. It hurts me to see you like this." The police arrived quickly, and Giselle was taken away by the authorities. I accompanied Harold in the ambulance. Though he was unconscious, he still tightly gripped my hand, unwilling to let go. Ellen rushed to the hospital after hearing the news, frantic with worry. Only when she confirmed that I was unscathed did she breathe a sigh of relief. You scared me to death, Coral. You have no idea how worried I was. Thank God Harold saved you. By the way, how is he now? I looked toward the bed where Harold was lying, his body wrapped in bandages. The doctor said his arm, neck, and right side of his face were all badly corroded by the acid. He will have permanent scars. Ellen sighed deeply. I couldn't bring myself to look at him anymore. My throat tightened with emotion. All the regrets and pain from the past seemed to suddenly fade away in that moment. The last time I visited Harold, his mother was there as well. The room was quiet. I glanced through the window, seeing Harold taking a nap, so I didn't want to disturb him. I placed the fruit I brought at the door and was about to leave when his mother called me. Coral, wait. This was the first time she called me by my full name. Before, she had always referred to me as that actress, with disdain. I stopped in my tracks and turned back. She said, leave here. Anywhere is fine. Just don't keep showing up in front of him. He's stubborn. Once he's set on someone, he won't let go. I know, there are things he's done wrong by you, but he's my only son, and the family's only heir. These past 6 months, he's ignored the company, following you around. Now, look at him, he's become this way because of you. I really admire you, but business is business. I don't want him to have anything to do with you anymore. Do you understand? I thought for a moment, then nodded. I understand. I walked out of the hospital, and the silk trees along the roadside were in full bloom. I reflected on my past with Harold. Then, I sighed softly. From familiarity to strangers, that was our story. Postscript. The day Harold was discharged from the hospital, he found out that Coral had been forced by her mother to leave Beijing. Feeling both angry and anxious, he immediately booked a plane ticket to go after her. But as fate would have it, on his way to the airport, he was involved in a car accident. A 3-car pileup. He was caught in the middle, with forces hitting him from both sides, and the injuries were serious. It wasn't until 4 months later that he fully recovered. His hospital roommate was watching the live broadcast of the 15th Film Festival Awards ceremony. He heard Coral's voice, I want to thank my agent, Ellen, my boyfriend, Ives, and my fans. She was holding a glittering, heavy trophy. Standing there, she was stunning, beyond words. Harold suddenly remembered, some year, some month, some day. Back then, she had been young and innocent, leaning against him, her eyes full of dreams about the future. When I win Best Actress, your mom will finally accept me, right? I'll work really hard, and you can just wait to marry me. Now she had truly won the award. But the person standing by her side was no longer him. The end.